This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Dr. Kenan Sahin, who has lived the American educational experience from every angle: student, professor, innovator, and entrepreneur. In his new book, American Educational Excellence, The Foundation of Our Values, Democracy, and Market Capitalism, he explores why America's unique approach to education has produced so much creativity, innovation, and prosperity, and why protecting it matters more than ever. Drawing from a life shaped by both Turkish roots and American opportunity, Dr. Sahin argues that our schools do more than teach facts. They cultivate the curiosity, adaptability, and collaboration that fuel democracy and drive markets. Dr. Kenan Sahin, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I am doing well. Just call me Kenan. It's shorter, more efficient.
Sounds
And I
good.
call
I
you
will
Joe.
call you Kenan. Great to meet you, Kenan. And so I want to get your take, because I always love, because I feel like in this world of ageism where we're just like, old people, get off to the side, shut up, we don't need to hear from you. I love speaking to people that have been around a long time, because you've seen this movie before. You've seen the trends come around and back around. And so the trend that we're seeing now in the world of education is college. Who needs college? It's overpriced. It's gonna ruin your credit. You're gonna be paying for it till you're dead. And I grew up in a time as a Generation Xer, Kenan, of you got to go to college or you won't get a job. I remember looking at sometimes job posts and it'd be like a reception position. It'll be like, needs a 4-year degree. I'm like, to be a receptionist? Like, I don't understand. So you've seen this swing of like, everyone needs to have college now. And obviously we are speaking in broad terms, Kenan, but now nobody needs college. Now that you've seen this play out several times, because you were around before the college thing was very necessary. So tell me about all these swings and where we are now here in 2025 in terms of how America and Western cultures treat universities.
Well, let me start with a simple saying I grew up with. Comfort hurts. It's a very profound saying, very simple. And when people get very comfortable, they get restless. And the comfort begins to hurt. This is actually the best of times, but it looks as though to people who have not seen these movies before, worst of times. Times are really bad. The country is falling apart. The world is falling apart. And yet, if one looks at the numbers, I'm a data guy. I've been trained as a technologist, engineer, scientist, all of them. When I look at the data, this is actually the best of times. The world has never been this good. Now, coming back to education, in a context where everything seems to be really going well, there's another paradox. The detail hurts. And we begin to focus on details. Let me give you an example. You're in top shape, houses, everything is fine, and you stump your toe, and it hurts. And now your entire mindset is about this minor injury on your toe. But if the person has cancer and many parts of his body are falling apart, he stumps his toe, it's nothing. It's just ignored. So both perspectives, I think, describe what is going on. And that's why I appreciate your mentioning length of time, the perspective. Uh, it's important to look forward, but once in a while, it's good to look back and see how far we've come along. And that puts things into perspective. That's why I felt compelled, almost compelled, to write this book, which came out, by the way, just a few days ago, on the 21st. Why American education is not only second to none, no other system even comes close to the depth and breadth of the American educational system, both at the primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels. but why it is excellent? What is the foundation of its being excellent? So um, that's my perspective, and I didn't realize how timely it would be. Just yesterday, I was at a dinner event. Wouldn't you know, the same perspective that's now being heard all around. Why do so many people need college education? And what would you suggest that my son or grandson or granddaughter about to enter college, what he or she should study? And what are we going to do about the shortage of tradespeople? I can't get a plumber. I can't get an electrician. Why don't some people go into that? And on it goes. And then there's this notion in the business community, and I've been on both sides, more or less the same. About 20 years in education as an academic, about 20 years now plus in business. And the executive saying the college, especially the college, they pick on the college, business model is broken. They seem to be perpetually going bankrupt, perpetually wanting money, and they can't get their act together. They can't stabilize anything, and on it goes. So I come back to my original saying it's so good, it's been so productive,
Yeah.
it's hurting people.
Wow.
And they focus on a toe, and you say, look, your body is in excellent shape. You don't have heart disease, you don't have cancer, you don't have this, you don't have that, and you're complaining about a hurting toe? Wow. That's my perspective.
I,
But I try to tie this to data. I try to tie this to fundamentals that people can understand. Otherwise, I would be a dogmatic person saying, oh, everything is good. Why do you say that? Everything is not good.
yeah.
What makes you think everything is right? Okay, let me explain. So that's what I am.
I love that, and it's so funny because I want to double click on your first point there about nostalgia, because you know how people there's a phrase of looking at life through rose-colored glasses, and I wrote this something wrote a piece the other day. I'm not as smart or bright as you, but I wrote this blog post about looking at life through nostalgia glasses. Everything always looks better in the past, and I brought up the point. I know you're more of an NSYNC guy than a Backstreet Boy guy, but I remember 20 something years ago, Kenan, people like, oh, these boy band songs, they're so terrible. Nobody cares. You fast forward 25 years later, and like I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys is considered like one of the greatest pop songs of all time, because now we're looking at it through nostalgia glasses as opposed to living in real time where we're like, oh, this is so cheesy. Dancing and frosted tips and mugging to the camera. And now we're look back at like, oh man, weren't those great those times? So I see what you're saying when it comes to the education piece. So thank you for sharing that, and also the part of you talking about how things have changed. How did things change for you in terms of your perspective of education? Because, like you mentioned, years in the as in well, you guys had years as a professor, years as an entrepreneur, years as an executive. Of those, which of those changed your view on education the most?
Well, I think my uh, big insights, not the biggest insights, came about when I moved from academia into the business world, kind of accidentally. I had actually come to MIT to study applied stuff because my passion was in physics, and I thought, well, what am I going to do with physics? And I don't want to be an academic. I don't want to pursue a doctorate in physics. So why don't I switch to a practical field, engineering, where I can apply things and I can join a company and do things. That was my perspective. So I made the mistake of doing very well at MIT. My,
You
my
made the
grades were
mistake of doing well. Yes, yes.
my
If
grades
we
were very,
all had your problems, Keenan, right?
that was in retrospect, it turns out it was both a problem and a wonderful thing. And it brought me to the attention of the professors in the graduate school. And now I think they enticed me with a wonderful fellowship. They said, look, you can skip masters. You could just enter into the doctoral program right away, and we'll give you a nice big fellowship. In fact, you'll even have a stipend. And mind you, as an undergraduate, while I had my scholarship that covered my tuition, I had to work my head off to earn my own keep, my lodging, my food, and all of that. So once I entered the doctoral program, I realized how much I loved research and how much I loved teaching. So I decided, well, why not just continue, push on, and uh, and along the way, actually very early, they assigned me to teach a special class at MIT. There are, of course, undergraduates, there are the master's students and the doctoral students. I had no issue with them. They had no issue with me. Uh, and then I was asked to teach Sloan Fellows. I really didn't know who they were. I was working on my doctoral thesis. And so the day came and I distributed my syllabus. I walk into this classroom. I said, my goodness, these people are old. I was 25
Wow.
and these guys were in their 30s. And to me, they were on the other side of 30. Anyone above 30 for me was old.
Yeah.
Older, and that kind of, and so on. Now, this is a different era. These were the Sloan Fellows, the mid-level executives and managers and doctors and even colonels from the Pentagon who were being sent to get their master's degree. And they knew about the stuff actually much more than I did. But of course, I was the prof. So I told them, I said, look, here's how we're going to approach this. You're a student. Actually, I'm a student too. But I promise I'll keep one lecture, one chapter ahead of you. So you learn from me and so on. We had a wonderful time. So I was asked to teach them again and again. And I'm a pontificating kind of a guy. As an academic, I take liberties, go in this direction, in that direction, and so on and so forth. And this continued for many years. I was totally enjoying it until one day there was a booming voice from the back of the class when I was pontificating. And I'd be very explicit. This person said, Kenan, that's just full of crap. Wow. So during those years, and even to this day, you don't really challenge the guy who's going to give you your grade.
Right. That's kind
And
of
you
like
just
school
don't
101. You don't want to piss off the teacher. Yes.
You don't want to piss off the teacher. So, and everyone was just horrified. I turned to him. I said, Don, that was his name. I won't give his last name. I said, you may be correct, but let's ask the class and let's discuss this and so on. And when we discussed, we both gained perspective. It turned out at his company, it was a huge company, his CEO had the philosophy that I was criticizing. And it got to him that in some sense, I was insulting his CEO, which of course I didn't even know who he was and so on. So we came to terms. He saw my viewpoint. I saw his viewpoint. We pushed on. But after a while, I realized I had never practiced in industry. And I was educating, in quotes, these captains of industry. One of them was Bill Ford, the CEO, eventual CEO of Ford, Kofi Annan from United Nations.
Wow.
There were colonels from the Pentagon. There were even MDs in the classroom. And so I said, I better get some experience. And so started a company trying to get some field experience on my own dime. And that's when I gained a lot of insight. That company grew. It grew to be 1,000 people eventually across the world. And I had 12 offices. I had to shuttle from office to office. And being a former academic, I still would hire the people myself, interview them, assess them, and so on. And soon I appreciated the difference between our educational system and the educational systems in Europe and elsewhere. And it hit me hard. And I realized our education system does much more than educating in STEM, science and technology and so on. We actually, in our system, are trained to be functioning citizens in a democracy and functioning citizens in a market based capitalism, which is brutal, competition everywhere, and no shortage of smart people who are willing to, boom, get out there and compete. And when I looked into it in more detail, I realized how profound our system is in doing that. And also, I realized real STEM education should not be in a high school, but in a college. And when I looked at our system, I realized it is in our college. So now let me tell you the story that opens my book. Here I am in Holland and a big high level conference on competitiveness, innovation, entrepreneurship, all these things. And the person before me who pretended to be an expert on education, I mean, he couldn't find enough bad words to criticize our system. And he was extolling the virtues of the Irish educational system, this education system, that education system. So I couldn't help it. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to shorten my real presentation because I have to comment on what has been said before. And I'm the kind of person who can lecture without any notes. Some people have to write everything, and if they depart from the script, they get lost. I have no issue changing, organizing, and so on. Part of it was trying to teach the Sloan Fellows because you just can't read your lecture notes. They ask tough questions. So I said, let me start with the following. I said, engineers who've gone through the US educational system are better than the engineers who've gone through your system in Europe. Did I get their attention? Suddenly, people straightened up, leaned forward, looking at this guy. Who the hell is this guy? Making a statement like that. I mean, us Europeans, we have a monopoly on intellectual pursuits, education, and so on and so forth. So, so I went to explain. I said, I'm glad I got your attention. But I said, in your high schools, you have these poor kids sitting at their desks, cramming into them math, science, you name it. And when our high school students are benchmarked against your high school students, we don't do so well. And I said, as a result, you pick on us, and as the previous speaker did. But I said, let me advance now. First of all, at age 15, 16, kids are not really ready for that kind of deep stuff. They are grappling with how to grow up, how to fall in love, how to fall out of love, how to make money, how to organize their lives, how to be independent of their families. They are facing big issues. But what do? You bring them to the classroom, sit at a desk, and learn math. Sure, they do well in their test scores. Now let's advance to college. What happens in your colleges? I said, for instance, in England, that's 3 years. It's a joke, I said. 3 years. And the professor lectures. Now let me move to our country. It's 4 years, and there's quality control. You can't get away with just coming to the classroom, listening to a person who hasn't changed his lecture notes in 30 years. He won't even talk to you. You can't talk to him. In our system, class sizes are small, and the professor is not a professor, he's Joe, he's Jim, he's almost a colleague. And, but even though he's a colleague, he gives you a pop quiz. You have to write a term paper. You have to take midterm exams. You can't get away with bullshitting. You really have to know the stuff. and there's an actual end of the semester exams, and you get a grade. You're graded against all the other students, and it's serious. You actually have to write an exam paper, turn it in. It comes back with all kinds of red marks, red marks. And I said, this goes on and on and on. So when a person graduates from a college, even a lesser college, he's quality controlled or she's quality controlled. Then you enter graduate school. It's no joke. It's the same thing. You can't get away with just reading, as it is called in England. You read with a professor. Nope. You have to take an exam. You have to write a term paper. On top of that, you have to write a thesis, which has to show that you're capable of original thinking based on literature. Now I said, let's put all of these things together. A US trained engineer goes to Japan. He doesn't speak the language, he doesn't know the culture, but he will get up, start a company or advance his company, start a branch. He will socialize. Yeah, they may say he's awkward, he doesn't. What difference does it make? He succeeds. And I said, let me come to our country. I said, I've hired engineers in Europe as well as in the US. Yes, your best trained are excellent, but they sit there like tulips until you ask them something. US engineer, my goodness, you can't hold him down. He will challenge you. He has his ideas. He's an entrepreneur. He's an innovator. He's learned how to compete. Then I went back a little bit into the families. I said in Europe, the family is changed now, but in family drops the kid off at the doorsteps. That's the end of the story, and the kid comes home. Not so in the US. He has music lessons, he has soccer, he has football, and the family goes, claps him, criticize him at the dinner table. You discuss these things. I said, this looks like fun. Actually, it's training. Training to be a citizen, training to take initiative, and training to how to deal with conflict in life. And life. So I went on and on and on. So at the end of the conference, the chairman, who was a Dutch, I came over. He said, we Dutch speak to frankly. I said, I know that. I know that. He said, I have one son in the US, college, one son here in Holland. He said, I completely agree with you. I said, thank you. So that's our system. Now, in the book, I go into the history because without understanding history, it is difficult to appreciate what we have. What we have. And the history is a fascinating history. And that's why it's so difficult to duplicate it because it has really fundamental historical roots that fit our rather unique society. We're not like China, we're not like France, we're not homogeneous. We're really a mosaic of many notions and so on that have come together and have created a very successful society. But I'll stop there. If you want me to, I can go into some of these
No,
values.
no, yeah, yeah. Well, before we, yeah, I want to actually move on a couple things here because you talked about the history where we are, and so we started this conversation talking about sort of like the cultural fit of colleges now. Like, do you have to go? Do you not have to go? The price of college. But now there is this relationship between universities and the government, which I had never seen before. You obviously, coming back from your experience of working in Europe, where sort of the government is very much intertwined in the university system. In the States, not so much. So my question to you is, how can universities here in the States preserve their independence while partnering with government and businesses? Because as the headlines have read, Trump versus Harvard, Trump versus woke colleges. We don't need to go into all that, but that's all performative. But what it can have is impact when it comes to these universities getting funding. So how do these universities toe the line of being places for independent thought, for letting young people become themselves, but then have to worry about whether the government is going to be mad at them one day and be like, oh, I don't like the way that happened, so you're going to get less funding. How do we thread this needle going forward?
Joe, I think you're giving me an opening to promote my next book.
Okay.
My next book is on the triumvirate, the three pillars of American entrepreneurship, which rests on the flow of innovations into implementation. And I trace back the history of these three pillars: the government, on the one hand, university, sort of generally speaking, and industry, generally speaking. If you go back to the colonial era, before our great republic, these were really three islands, and they had their own objectives and so on. There was some interaction, but after the republic was founded, uh, our our country, being independent of the mothership, England, needed to have its own civic leaders and lawyers and doctors and so on to function as a government. Well, where do you get them? At the university. And so there was more interest in that direction. But what really gave a big push to the interaction between the government and the university, and to an extent industry, was just before the Civil War, the explosion in the industrial revolution in our country. And as that was happening, it became clear that these elite universities that were almost all founded on religious principles. Harvard was, Princeton was, Yale was, and so on and so forth. They were all theological schools in so many ways. And there were a few exceptions. For instance, University of Pennsylvania was Benjamin Franklin's leadership expanded its horizon somewhat. So in 1861, uh, having proposed it now the second time, there was a Morrill Land Grant Act. And our government at that time, mind you, the Civil War was just around the corner, realized we needed universities dedicated to teaching the sons and daughters of farmers and blacksmiths and so on. So the Land Grant College Act was passed and signed by Lincoln. And that land grant college said, okay, to the states, here's federal land or your land, give it to a new college, a starting college, but it has to be dedicated to not religious purposes, but really training entrepreneurs, blacksmiths, you name it, people in trades and applied arts and military, both. So Land Grant College that was the seed for many of the eminent state universities across the country. And with two exceptions, private. One was Cornell, the other one's MIT.
Hmm.
Those are the two land grant colleges. And MIT's logo is mens et manus, hands and mind. It's not just mind, it's not just thinking. You do things with your hands. So that really not only revolutionized education in our country, but created these ag schools, agricultural schools, all kinds of industrial schools, ROTC programs, military training programs, and so on. And it created a relationship between our government and this universal system. By government, I don't just mean federal, but also the state.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to the Second War, and that will bring us to the present. We got caught in a very bad way because our universities were not on par with the German universities. Before the Second War, when you talked about science, when you talked about technology, you had to learn German.
Hmm.
Many of the publications, seminal publications, were in German. Scientific publications were over there. Yes, our universities also did research, but not the kind of research that was being done. And if you look at some of the luminaries before the Second War, A lot of them were in Europe. That's why to this day, Europe thinks they are still in this era. So there was one Vannevar Bush, associated with MIT later on, but at that time he headed an office in Washington, who went to the government and said, look, we almost lost the war to the Germans because they had superior technology. They had rocket technology, all of these things. Einstein came from there. We need to have deep R&D in our country. And the way you do that is you pay for full cost in a university. So the federal government says, would you like to do research in advanced physics? Yes. Okay. Here's a potential grant, and we will pay not only for the professor's a proportionate salary, but we'll pay for the overhead. I will pay for the expenses of the laboratory. We'll pay for the expenses of the lawyers. We'll pay for the expenses of the university, but a proportionate share. And that model was extremely successful. And that's what propelled Harvard's and MIT's and Berkeley's and you name it to the forefront of science. Now, let me back up and I will interweave into this another pillar of our educational system, which, by the way, numbers 4,000 to 5,000, depending on how you count. We have 4,000 to 5,000 universities and colleges, institutions of higher learning. About half of them, actually a little bit more of them, are state. Uh, and Nebraska, Minnesota, Wyoming, you name it. And about 1,600 of them are private. If you go back to the beginning, the first college in our country was Harvard College, and it was private. That's the way the pilgrims wanted it to be because they had rebelled against the king. Last thing was, give us money. Why would the king do something like that? So they started Harvard College as a private institution. And the reason it was named Harvard was John Harvard, was trained at Cambridge University in England. He was a minister. He left half of his wealth and the library to this new college, which was then renamed as Harvard College. Philanthropy. That's why our universities, private universities, succeed. We're second to none when it comes to philanthropy. Let me talk about my alma mater, MIT, even though it's a land grant college. Its endowment is $30 billion. Harvard's endowment is $50 billion. And it is a major research university. And now let me come back to what Vannevar Bush accomplished. The productivity of our universities is so immense that I would say, in comparison, the modest amount that our government has been spending on university grants has paid off enormously. So now there's this notion, yes, Harvard is in the news, MIT in this news, but it affects only a small number of our universities. And we have 4,000 to 5,000 of them. So there's a lot of noise, and MIT is standing up. I'm on the board of MIT, I will say that, and I fully supported MIT's position. That's not the way to deal with universities. And that's not the way to deal with institutions. There has to be independence, there has to be an arm's length relationship. And the research and development our universities provide are so valuable for the government. Without that, our government really cannot function. So even our national labs cannot do it. So this situation alarms me, it bothers me, it upsets me, but I think it's transient. It's transient, and we need to look beyond that, and we really address a much bigger threat, which is what you started out by saying at the beginning. Our kids don't need college education. that they're better off being plumbers and electricians than actually getting a college education.
Yeah, I want to actually jump on the thing you mentioned with the endowments, right? So I believe because when you were talking about, it, I looked up Harvard's endowment is 56 billion, and I almost feel like many of these upper echelon colleges are almost run like private equity funds, where it's like they're all about keeping in all the money and then limiting the number of people that go to the school. I think the acceptance rate is like 5% or something like that. So if they have all this money, it costs hundreds of $1,000s to go to school. Why do they need the government's money? Like, I'm just devil's advocate here, Kenan. Why? If they have billions of dollars that they're sitting on and they're
You're right.
funneling in more and more money every
That's
year, why can't the colleges be like, you know what? We got this. We don't need your money.
I no, I myself raised that question in a board meeting.
Okay.
I said, please be careful, because there's the appearance, there's the reality. The appearance is this: Harvard and Princeton and all these theological schools, except MIT. MIT is not a theological school. You're sitting on these big endowments. That's capital over here. And the students have to pay $60, $70, $80,000. You get government grants, you get patents out of those government grants, you turn around and license the patents, make money. From the outside, it looks like you're running a business.
Yeah.
And then you open your hand to the federal government and say, give us money. Not only that, pay for capital costs. I said, please be very careful, because one of these days, the federal government will ask for financial statements and will say, and sure enough, I said this 10 years ago.
Wow.
Sure enough, the federal government came and said, we're going to tax your endowment. And it alarmed some people. I said, it's a slippery slope. And then I said, one day the federal government might attack the overhead rates. Sure enough, that's happening. Now, let me look at it from the other side, the faculty side. There are three groups in a university: the students, the faculty, and those faculty who are really in research deeply, and
Scientists and
postdocs
stuff.
and so on.
Yeah.
They don't do teaching. They don't do teaching. Now, the student tuition pays for, depending on the college, maybe 15, maybe 20, maybe 30% of the total cost. The real cost is in research and all these labs and so on that have to be maintained. Now, philanthropy, the endowment comes from philanthropy. A lot of that money is designated. For instance, if I want to start a company and raise VC money, now if the VC money says, Kenan, we're going to pay that money to Joe. We're going to endow Joe. We're going to endow XYZ laboratory, which has to be named after me, the founder of the VC company. I don't have access to that money. It's all fractured. It is for a specific purpose that the philanthropist has in mind. So I can't take that money, pay it for students. It's restricted. Most of the endowment is restricted because it comes from philanthropists. Very small amount is unrestricted. And people in the government, outside of the university system, don't understand that. They don't understand. Now, with respect to tuition, I also object. It's very high, very high. But 50% of tuition is discounted because of scholarships. So I made a proposal. I said, look, MIT can go to the philanthropists and say, give us money specifically to make MIT tuition free. How much will that cost? I made the computations. It's not that much. And there is, in fact, MIT announced a program whereby if a family makes, I believe, less than $200,000,
Yeah. Harvard has similar
its tuition
program.
is free.
Yeah.
And even if tuition is free, universities make that tuition free, they still would face a huge cost because they can't touch the endowment to
Got it.
cover all these other costs. If I'm a university administrator and if you've given $10 million to endow Professor Joe Smith, I can't take that money and say, hey, I want to use it over here. When I'm the president of a company, I can decide. I can say, I'm going to take this fund over here. I'm going to move it over here. If General Electric has bought some items from us, General Electric cannot dictate how we're going to use that money, but the philanthropist does. So that is not understood in Washington.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I think you could blame the universities for this because I think everyone knows about these incredible endowments that these schools have, but they don't know the nuance of these
They don't know.
endowments.
They
And
don't
so
know.
I think that's important for that people to know. And I don't think a lot,
No,
obviously,
they don't understand it.
they don't
Even
understand how it works.
professors don't know it.
Yeah, yeah.
I sit on the board and I've been kind of studying this. Let me give you a rather dramatic episode when there was that big collapse in 2006, 2007.
Yeah, the
Harvard,
08 recession. Yeah.
yeah, Harvard had to lay off people. And people were upset. My goodness. Harvard sitting on, at that time, I think it was more like $40 billion. And here's what was going on. Some Harvard body had proposed to the Massachusetts legislature that they pass a law which said if an endowment is underwater, you can't touch it. One, the federal government mandates that if you're going to be a nonprofit, you have to distribute 5% from that. Otherwise, what do you mean nonprofit? You just accumulate. So an institution like Harvard has to distribute 5% to the operating budget. And if the specific endowment, say for Professor Joe Smith, which was $5 million, grew to $6 million, so you can take it out, but now is underwater because of that sudden drop in the stock market. It's underwater, you can't touch it. So Harvard had applied its free cash to all kinds of investments, which they couldn't liquidate. And there are all these restrictions on these specific endowments. They needed cash. So there are two ways. They issued bonds at 6% to raise money, and they had to lay off people,
Wow.
which from the outside seemed insane.
Yeah,
But
does.
once you get into it, again, the difference between a university budget and a capital budget, and let's say my company's capital budget, I have full access to the capital budget. And I just so happens I don't have VC money, but if I did, I'd go talk to them. I'd say, listen, we need this, we need this, we need. I can't do that in a university. It's restricted. The philanthropist, if especially if he's dead, in his will, said you can only spend it for this purpose. Period.
Well, no, all right, let me ask. All right, I'll devil's advocate one more time. So, so you put out you've set the scenario of like something happens, a financial crisis. All of a sudden, universities are acting like regular profit companies, right? For many profit companies, they could be like, "Oh, I've got this little slush fund. I've got this little fund, a piggy bank that I can go to in case something goes wrong." Why don't universities have a little piggy bank? Because as we
They
know,
do.
Kenan,
They do some.
they
They
do.
do some. That's why the 5% distribution comes in. They do have some, but it is not enough to deal with all of these things. And also, university cannot sell assets.
Okay.
See, if I run a company
Right, you could sell
and
off.
I have a division and I need money, I'm the CEO. I go to the board. I said, I want to spin out this division, raise money, or I want to sell this building. You can't do that in academia. Everything is restricted. Everything is restricted because if someone endowed a building, uh, someone endowed this. You can't just say, "Oh, let's just sell that. Let's just sell that." And also in academia, you cannot fire because there's a tenure system, and I'm glad for the tenure system because if it weren't for the tenure system, academic salaries would go through the roof, and also academic independence would disappear. I can't tell you, I've even seen it myself. A philanthropist comes, he's from a big company. He says, "You know that Joe fellow, he's a troublemaker. He just published an article that destroyed my product, announced to the whole world that my product is toxic. Get rid of him. And if you get rid of him, I'll give you $10 million." And those pressures exist on a daily basis.
Let me
Uh,
ask you about Keenan. Go back to the because of tenure, salaries would skyrocket. Why? Explain that. Why would it
because
skyrocket without
these
tenure?
academics are so valuable, their actually comparable salary in industry is much higher than they get in academia. And it's very easy. For instance, let's take the top position, the CEO. At a place like Harvard and MIT and so on and so forth, they manage a budget of billions of dollars. That's how big the budgets are. They manage an extremely complex staff, and their compensation is a tiny fraction of what a CEO gets. These days, a CEO in a big company getting $15 million, $20 million, $50 million. There's no issue. Not so in academia. And if you look at the professors, and if the CEO in a university is this big, and top rated Nobel winning academic is this much, so the salaries would go up, and you would have rotation. That you would lose the knowledge base, and furthermore, there would be tremendous pressures on academia. Look how much pressure the government is putting on academia. Why? Because academics criticize the government.
Right.
So the government is saying, "We want you not to criticize us." That's what the government is doing now. And we want you to sign basically loyalty oaths. We want you to turn over all the student records to us. And we want you to discontinue disciplines that the government, we don't think we really need it.
Yeah.
If the government does that with all the controls that we have Congress, we have our courts, and so on and so forth, guess what a big company would do? That's why we need tenure. And that's why I've told my colleagues, when you accept money from private hands, be very careful. Make sure you put into that agreement of accepting the gift the independence of the institution, that they cannot dictate what courses we will teach. They will happily do that. I can't tell you how many CEOs would love to give money. By the way, it's not their money, it's the company money.
Right.
I'm going to give $10 million, Joe, but I want you to teach this course that I always wanted to see in universities. Really? What is that course? Well, it's a course that's going to help my company a lot. I don't want to do the research. I want you to. I can go on and on. But
Wow.
Joe, I don't want to lose the value of college education for my grandchildren, my children. They're going through college. And I will come back to that. I don't want to lose that topic. We are in a different era suddenly, and the college education is even more important. But let me put two data points as answer to those people who say we need more electricians, we need more plumbers. First of all, I'll say, which students will go into that? Your son? No, no, my son wants to go to college. I want my son to go to college. So whose son or daughter are you talking about? You think they would like to go and be a tradesperson, drive a truck, and do people's dirty work? Who are you going to have a draft that mandates that people go into plumbing and so on? I said in the past, unions used to train them. The unions are gone. So who's going to train them? So that's one issue. The other is, let me take you to 1900s. We had 60% of the workforce working in farming. So supposing in 1900 people said, forget about college, let's just train farmers how to do farming. Well, fast forward, 1% of the workforce is in farming. And yet we're the breadbasket of the world. Why? Productivity, mechanization. In 1980s, we had 1 trillion in manufacturing and we had 20% of our workforce in manufacturing. Right now, we have 2.5 trillion in manufacturing and 6 to 7% in manufacturing. Why? It's mechanization, automation, productivity, and also outsourcing some of the jobs. But if we bring them back, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Now, let me put myself in a position of a CEO. Suddenly, I'm forced to bring back manufacturing that I'm doing in XYZ country. I have to be competitive. It's very expensive to hire locally. What do you think I will do? Robots, automation. It costs $30,000 to buy a robot. So why would I hire people? So this notion that if we I mean expand manufacturing into areas where we really don't want to be in, but if we're forced to be in, we still won't hire. Many of them, maybe temporarily, but very quickly adopt automation, which brings me to why college education now is even more valuable. My son, and sons should be wiser than us, and I have sons wiser than I am. He said, Dad, the world is changing from content to asking the right question. And if you interact with ChatGPT, it is not about content. You're not showing your expertise. But if you ask the right questions, you're going to get expertise. And on the spot, if I'm a surgeon and I've forgotten a specific procedure, I can take 2 minutes off. Hey, ChatGPT, give me a detailed prescription of how I do it. We use it in our company. We're not surgeons, we're material scientists, but we get a complete recipe how to run a lab experiment.
Right.
So I don't need to spend 10 years in practice trying to learn a specific procedure, but I have to know how to ask the right question. If I don't have a college education, if I'm a plumber, if I'm an electrician, I don't have the context. But more than that, Joe, our society is getting so complex that I have to know how to process so many things so that I can be a responsible citizen and structure my life accordingly. So, college education is even more important, but I have some ideas how college education can be adapted, hybridized. One is Northeastern University has a program, basically an internship. And in the sophomore year, you can find a company and go and work for that company for a semester or so. The company benefits, and the student raises some money. MIT has a program called Undergraduate uh, Professional Opportunities, UPOP. Uh, its comparable program is Europe, Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. If I'm a freshman, I get linked up with a Nobel laureate and I do research and it advances me. Or if I want to interact with a company, I have a professional opportunity. The company gets to see me and I get to see the real world. I think all the universities across our country can have programs which allow students to link up with industry in various ways and enhance industry, deal with these issues, because the university student can be trained in a specific skill set very quickly. One doesn't need to have a specific program and so on and so forth. So I have many creative ideas, but I'm not alone. Don't mess up with our university system. Let our university ecosystem adapt.
And you can read all about it in American Educational Excellence, the Foundation of Our Values, Democracy, and Market Capitalism. He is Dr. Kenan Sahin. Dr. Kenan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Dr. Sahin and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.